Imagine the moment when you finally realize you can't keep pretending anymore. The roles you've been playing for years start to feel tight, almost like they're choking you. The social games, the expectations, the pressure to fit in, it all becomes clear in a way you can't ignore. The life you built with effort and sacrifice starts to feel less like freedom and more like a cage made from other people's opinions. This isn't sadness or failure, it's awareness. It's waking up. And this awakening doesn't explode into your life all at once. It doesn't come as a dramatic transformation. Instead, it slowly settles in, like water soaking into stone. Quietly, gradually, it changes everything. Things that once felt normal begin to feel strange. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. Even simple small talk starts to lose its flavor. Goals that once pushed you forward begin to feel meaningless, like they belong to someone else's life, not yours. Old identities, old versions of who you thought you were no longer sit right on you. It feels like outgrowing clothes that you once believed defined you. This shift is not something you consciously choose. It unfolds on its own. It's as if your inner being begins to reject what is false, the same way the body naturally rejects what it cannot accept. So the real question is not whether change will happen, but how gently you allow yourself to go through it. The first attachment that begins to fade is the need for approval. At first, you don't even notice it leaving. But slowly, the urge to be liked, validated, or accepted starts to lose its grip. You find yourself unable to perform the same way you used to. The urge to impress feels heavy. Smiles don't come as easily. Words feel forced when they are meant only to please others. It's not anger or rebellion, it's something deeper. It's inner alignment beginning to take over. Like a tree finally reaching deep water, you stop depending on surface-level validation. The performance drops away, not because you force it, but because it no longer feels natural. In its place comes something quieter but stronger, a sense of inner stability. You begin to realize that your existence does not need to be justified by applause. You are not something that must constantly prove its worth. You simply are. It can feel freeing but also uncomfortable. There's a strange in-between phase where you no longer rely on approval, yet you're still learning how to stand without it. A space where old dependence is gone, but full inner comfort hasn't fully arrived yet. Then something else begins to dissolve, the need to feel special. For so long, identity was built around being unique, important, different from others. There was a quiet pressure to stand out, to be recognized, to be seen as above average in some way. But as this inner shift deepens, even that desire starts to fade. You may notice yourself becoming less interested in proving how deep, intelligent, or awakened you are. Achievements feel less like something to announce and more like something simply experienced. The need to perform, even in subtle ways, starts to disappear. And at first, this creates fear. If I am not special, then who am I without all of this? But slowly, a deeper truth starts to surface. When the need to be special falls away, what remains is something more grounded and real. A quiet sense of simply existing without effort, without performance, without comparison. You begin to understand that you were never meant to constantly define yourself through labels or recognition. And in that space, something unexpected appears. Not emptiness, but clarity. A life that is no longer shaped by approval or comparison or performance, but by something far more steady and authentic. When the need to be special finally dies inside you, something far more real begins to emerge. You don't become less, you become more yourself, but without the layers, without the costumes, without the constant effort to prove anything. It's a strange paradox. The less you try to stand out, the more naturally your presence begins to shine. It's like watching nature do what it always does without effort. A flower doesn't bloom to gain attention. It doesn't try to impress anyone passing by. It simply blooms because that is its nature. In the same way, when you stop forcing yourself to appear important or exceptional, your true uniqueness starts to surface on its own, quietly, effortlessly, without performance. You are no longer trapped in the exhausting pressure of trying to seem significant. Instead, you begin to feel a kind of freedom in being ordinary. And in that ordinariness, something unexpected happens. Life itself feels extraordinary. You start to realize that simply existing, simply being alive in this moment, is already something deeply miraculous. And with that realization, the heavy burden of specialness begins to fall away. What once felt necessary for identity no longer feels important. There is relief in letting it go, as if something tight around your shoulders has finally loosened. Then another subtle shift begins to take place. You stop performing happiness. Not happiness itself, but the act of pretending. The act of forcing positivity when you don't feel it. The act of smiling when your heart is heavy. The act of convincing yourself and others that you are always okay, always strong, always above pain. At some point, the energy required for that performance becomes too much. You can no longer keep up the mask of constant brightness. You stop forcing yourself to look fine when you are not. You stop repeating words of encouragement that don't feel real in your body. And slowly, something more honest begins to take its place. You begin to understand that real inner growth is not about being endlessly positive. It's about being real. Real enough to feel joy when it comes naturally. Real enough to feel sadness when it arrives. Real enough to allow every emotion to exist without distortion or suppression. At first, this change can confuse the people around you. They were used to the version of you that performed. They were comfortable with the mask, even if they didn't realize it. But as you stop pretending, something surprising becomes clear. Authenticity has its own kind of light. It is not loud. It is not forced. It is not a fake brightness that tries to cover everything. It is a calm, steady glow that comes from truth itself. And even when that truth includes pain or vulnerability, it feels more honest, more grounding, and strangely more healing than any forced smile ever could. Letting go of the performance of happiness is not losing joy. It is reclaiming your full humanity. It is giving yourself permission to exist as you truly are, not as a filtered version designed to please others or meet expectations. It is life without editing. And then almost naturally, something deeper begins to shift. You start to release the need for certainty. Where you once held tightly to fixed beliefs, clear identities, and solid explanations for everything, you begin to loosen your grip. What once felt like safety now starts to feel like restriction. You begin to sense that life is not meant to be fully controlled or fully understood in neat final answers. At first, this feels uncomfortable, not knowing who you are in a fixed way, not knowing what will happen next. Not having everything explained or defined. The mind resists this deeply. It wants stability, structure, something to hold on to. But over time, something unexpected appears within this uncertainty, a deeper kind of peace, a stillness that doesn't depend on answers. Alongside it comes something even more alive, wonder. You begin to experience life differently. Like a child again, everything feels fresh. Each moment carries a sense of openness, of discovery. Not knowing stops feeling like a weakness and starts feeling like a doorway into presence itself. You realize that certainty was never the source of peace. It was just something the mind used to feel in control. But real freedom doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from being fully here without needing to pin life down. The mind will still try to pull you back. It will try to rebuild old structures of belief and identity, trying to make everything solid again. But each time you cling too tightly, something inside you already knows. It doesn't hold the same way anymore. And slowly, even that habit of grasping begins to fade. Until one day you are simply here, not trying to define everything, not trying to control everything, just present with what is unfolding. And in that space, something very quiet opens up, a kind of freedom that cannot be explained, only lived. In the openness of not knowing, something inside you finally feels free. Life is no longer experienced as a problem to decode or a puzzle to complete. It starts to feel more like a movement, a flowing dance where each step reveals its own quiet meaning in its own time. Nothing needs to be forced, and nothing needs to be fully understood for it to be real. As this deep shift continues, something else slowly begins to dissolve. Blame. You start to let go of the habit of holding others responsible for your pain, and eventually even the habit of blaming yourself begins to loosen. It doesn't mean you deny what happened or pretend life was always fair. It simply means you stop carrying the weight of resentment. Because at some point you see clearly that blame doesn't heal anything. It only keeps you tied to the very thing you're trying to move beyond. Holding on to blame is like carrying poison in your own hands and expecting someone else to suffer from it. You begin to notice patterns in your life more clearly, the same emotional wounds appearing in different forms, the same types of situations repeating again and again. And instead of immediately asking who is wrong, something new arises inside you. You start asking, what is this trying to show me? Or what is life trying to reveal through this? And slowly you realize something important. Every painful experience carries something hidden inside it. A message, a lesson, a mirror. But blame blocks your ability to see that. It keeps you focused on the surface instead of the meaning underneath. Letting go of blame is not simple. The ego resists it strongly. It wants to remain right. It wants to hold on to its story of who caused what. It wants to preserve identity through judgment. But awakening begins to make that story less solid. You start to see through it. Even if the emotional pain is still there, you stop feeding it with mental repetition. You no longer cling to the narrative. And in that space, something powerful happens. You feel a kind of inner freedom where no one outside of you holds control over your state anymore. You begin to take ownership of your life, not in a blaming way, but in a conscious way. You stop seeing people only as the cause of your wounds. Instead, you start seeing them as reflections. Not enemies, but mirrors showing you parts of yourself that were hidden, unhealed, or unacknowledged. In this way, even conflict begins to shift. It becomes less about right and wrong and more about awareness. Every difficult interaction becomes something you can learn from rather than something you must carry forever. Then another subtle transformation happens. You stop misusing spirituality as a way to escape reality. You can no longer use meditation, spiritual ideas, or elevated concepts to avoid what you actually feel inside. Awakening begins to pull you back into your body, back into your emotions, back into your human experience. It no longer allows you to float above life. Instead, it asks you to fully enter it. You start allowing emotions you once avoided: anger, sadness, desire, confusion. Not as mistakes, not as signs of failure, but as natural parts of being alive. As colors that make up the full picture of existence. You stop trying to rise above your humanity and instead begin to live it more honestly. Spirit and human experience are no longer separate things. They start to feel like one continuous reality. This is not always comfortable. The urge to escape still appears. The mind still tries to avoid discomfort, but something deeper in you no longer supports running away. Every time you try to disconnect, life brings you back to what you were trying to avoid, until eventually there is surrender, not forced but real. And in that surrender, you discover something surprising. Being human was never an obstacle to awakening. It was the doorway itself. To fully feel your fear, your longing, your grief, your joy, this is not separation from life, it is direct contact with it. It is the living experience of existence itself moving through you. And as this deep acceptance grows, another layer begins to dissolve, the sense of isolation. At the beginning of awakening, there can be a feeling of distance from others. It may seem like you are no longer connected to the world in the same way. People can feel distant, distracted, or asleep, and this can create a sense of separation. But over time, even this begins to soften. You stop believing that you are fundamentally different or separate or above others. You begin to see the shared reality underneath all human experience. Not everyone is the same, but everyone is human. Everyone feels, everyone struggles. Everyone longs in their own way. And suddenly you start recognizing yourself in others, in strangers, in those who seem unaware, in ordinary people living ordinary lives. That recognition slowly dissolves the loneliness. Connection no longer comes from ideas or beliefs. It comes from presence itself, from simply being here with another human being without needing to fix, change, or prove anything. You can sit with anyone, awake or unaware, and meet them as they are. There is no need to defend yourself or perform. You can just be present. And maybe this is one of the deepest gifts of this entire process, the return of real love. Not the idealized version of love, not fantasy or attachment, but the quiet, grounded experience of shared existence. The recognition that beneath all differences, something essential is always present between people. When the masks fall away, what remains is not separation, but connection. And in that connection, you realize that what you were searching for all along was never outside of life. It was life itself, experienced fully and honestly, without anything hidden or denied. Everything that once kept you trapped inside false identities slowly begins to fall away. Not because you are aggressively rejecting it, but because you simply can't carry it anymore. It feels too heavy now, too artificial, too small for the person you are becoming. And as it drops, something completely different starts to appear within you. A quiet sense of inner value, a real unforced sense of uniqueness, natural joy that doesn't depend on circumstances, peace that can sit with uncertainty, freedom from constant storytelling in the mind, full presence in your own body, a deeper connection with life itself. At first it can feel like loss. It feels like pieces of your identity are breaking apart one by one, like something is ending repeatedly inside you. But if you look closer, you realize it was never loss in the first place. It was release. It was freedom taking shape. Every single thing you let go of becomes an opening into something more honest. Every layer that falls away reveals something that was already there beneath it. You are not actually losing yourself. You are uncovering yourself. You are not fading away. You are being renewed in real time. What remains underneath all the noise is something extremely simple, still, clear, present. It is just you, without the need to perform, without fear, without masks, without trying to be anything else. This journey is not about adding more knowledge, more ideas, or more identity on top of yourself. It is about removing everything that is not real. It is not about becoming a better version of someone. It is about stopping the act of being someone you were never meant to be. Awakening is not an achievement you reach. It is more like coming home after a long time away. And like any real return, it doesn't happen in one sudden moment. It unfolds slowly. You may stumble. You may go back into old patterns. You may repeat habits you thought you had outgrown. But even those returns feel different now. They don't satisfy you the way they used to. That is not failure. That is change happening quietly inside you. It is like waves moving in and out until eventually the direction fully shifts. What no longer belongs starts to wash away on its own. So when you notice yourself letting go, approval, the need to feel special, constant performance, rigid certainty, blame, escape, isolation, don't resist it, don't force it, and don't try to control it. Let it happen naturally, because this process is not something you are doing alone. It is life itself reshaping you from within. And the more you stop holding on, the more smoothly it unfolds. This awakening is not something you walk step by step. It is more like a current you slowly surrender to. And your only real role is to stop resisting what is already changing. If you look at your life carefully, you may already see it happening. Certain relationships feel different now. Some ambitions don't carry the same excitement. Old identities don't sit comfortably anymore. Some things are quietly leaving your life on their own. Instead of fearing this, recognize what it really is. Not endings, but transitions. Not loss, but revelation. Because underneath all these layers you are letting go of, there is something deeply stable emerging. Something clear, strong, and unshakably real. And once you start sensing it, nothing external will feel more important than it. This is the core of awakening. Not becoming someone new, but finally stopping the act of being someone you are not. It is the slow removal of everything false until only truth remains. And truth doesn't need validation. It doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need performance. It simply is. When you begin to live from that place, life becomes lighter, less forced, more natural. You stop struggling against everything and start moving with it. It feels like you are no longer pushing life forward. It is carrying you. So don't fight the process of letting go. Allow it. Even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels empty, even when it feels like something is ending inside you. Because what feels like an ending is actually a beginning. On the other side of all this shedding is a life that feels more awake, more honest, and more alive than anything you have known before. And what remains when everything false is gone is not emptiness, but something very real, love. Not emotional dependence, not fantasy, but a deep sense of connection with existence itself. You begin to realize that everything you thought you were, the roles, the labels, the stories, were only coverings. And beneath them, you were already whole, already complete, already enough. Awakening is simply remembering that. And once you see it clearly, you cannot go back to pretending you never saw it. Something inside you has changed permanently. You were never actually missing anything. You were never broken. You were only forgetting who you really are. And now slowly you are remembering. And in that remembering there is freedom. Everything this journey points to is not about becoming something extraordinary, but about finally stopping the act of being something you are not. Piece by piece, life begins to strip away what was never truly yours. The need for approval, the pressure to be special, the constant performance of happiness, the illusion of certainty, the habit of blame, the urge to escape, and even the sense of being separate from others. At first, this feels like loss, as if parts of your identity are falling apart and disappearing. But with deeper awareness, you begin to see that nothing real is being taken from you. Only what was false is dissolving, and what remains underneath is something far more stable than anything you were trying to build through effort or control. As these layers fall away, you start to notice a quiet shift in the way life feels. There is less tension in simply existing. Less need to prove, explain, defend, or constantly define yourself. You begin to experience moments of natural presence where nothing is missing and nothing needs to be fixed. Even uncertainty no longer feels like a threat, but more like open space where life is free to move. What once felt like confusion slowly transforms into openness, and what once felt like emptiness begins to feel like clarity. You realize that you were never actually becoming someone new. You were simply uncovering what was always there beneath the noise. In this unfolding, something very profound becomes clear. You were never broken, never incomplete, and never truly lost. You were only identified with layers that could not hold the truth of who you are. And now, as those layers dissolve, you don't arrive at a new identity. You return to something much simpler and more real. A presence that does not need approval to exist, does not depend on certainty to feel safe, and does not require performance to feel worthy. A quiet, grounded awareness that simply is. And in that simplicity, life itself becomes different. You are no longer fighting reality or trying to control every outcome. Instead, there is a subtle trust in the unfolding of each moment. Even pain, even uncertainty, even change begins to feel like part of a larger movement you don't need to fully understand to be at peace within. You stop asking life to conform to your expectations and start meeting life as it is, directly and honestly. In doing so, something unexpected appears, freedom, not as an idea, but as a lived experience. This is the final recognition. Awakening was never about reaching a higher version of yourself, but about remembering your original nature beneath everything that was added on top. When all the roles fall silent, when all the stories stop running, when all the effort to become someone ends, what remains is not emptiness, but presence itself, clear, alive, and complete. And in that presence, there is no longer a search for approval, no fear of not being enough, no need to escape or resist. There is only being, simple, unforced, real. And in that realness, you finally understand that you were never on a journey to find yourself. You were always here. You only needed to stop leaving.